Welcome, everybody. My name is Rob Luzinski, and I am the Community Coordinator at the Stewardship Network. We'll be getting started here in just a minute, but feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like. Tell us your name, your organization, where you're tuning in from. And then just a friendly reminder that we'll be using the chat for any comments that you all would like to make or sharing of links and things like that. But we ask that you use the Q&A section to ask your questions because it makes it easier for us to keep track of them. We will hold the questions until the end of the presentation, and then we will have a discussion. So with that, I will get us started. So once again, my name is Rob Luzinski, and I'm the Community Coordinator at the Stewardship Network. And welcome to our June 2023 monthly webcast. First, a little bit about us. So the Stewardship Network is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with an award-winning 20-year history. We are now serving 20+ place-based member communities from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. And our free TSN webcasts happen on the second Wednesday of each month at the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. Our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. As many of you know, field season is on. I'm sure we are all feeling that right now. It's one of the busiest times of year in our sector. So we would just like to remind you that we are currently in the midst of the Stewardship Network Spring Challenge. So any work that you've been doing from April 12th to June 30th, we encourage you to report it at stewardshipnetwork.org/challenge. You can report your work hours, and you can also donate, and we're doing a one-to-one match campaign right now, so we really appreciate that. Just over 2 weeks to go, and we'd like to share some numbers with you. So we are at 11,300 plus hours reported, and that is over 3,800 participants. And we have raised over $14,200. And that is matched funds. And so again, your $1 becomes $2, your $10 becomes $20. And we really appreciate you supporting us during this exciting time now until June 30th. So again, June 30th deadline, report your hours since April 12th, and the one-to-one match is in effect until June 30th. And thank you in advance. We're also very excited to say that our new webcast page is now live. And so it's the same link. You can go to stewardshipnetwork.org/webcasts, and you can register for our upcoming webcasts. And you can also preview and plan for future webcasts. So now we're going a couple webcasts into the future. If you want to, register for the August webcasts, then you will have that opportunity. And you can also replay up to 2 years of back episodes at a glance. So we've made the archive more easy to navigate, we hope. And please share any feedback you have about that page, but we're really excited and we hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Taaja Tucker-Silva, an ecologist at the Great Lakes Science Center with the U.S. Geological Survey. And today we will be talking about the Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework, using participatory science to manage the invasive common reed effectively. Taaja, take it away.
Thanks. Let me just share my screen here. Are you guys seeing that okay?
I am, thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, yeah, thank you so much for the invite to be on the Stewardship Network's webinar series. I'm really excited to talk about PAMF. So that's what we call the Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework for short. So yeah, I'm located out of the USGS Great Lakes Science Center in Ann Arbor. And since I saw somebody else on your series doing the famous mitten hand thing, I am down here. So I'm going to give an overview of why we started PAMF, how the program works, and then some of our lessons learned during the program. And during our testing, some of these videos were a little choppy, so I apologize ahead of time. They go quick though. Oh wait, sorry, we don't go to the videos first. First, I wanted to thank our funder, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The our science advisory team, which is made up of folks from the Great Lakes Commission, USGS, and the University of Georgia. The Great Lakes Commission is the one that actually administers the program, and then the USGS and UGA assist with the technical side of things. So I'm at USGS, so I work on things like quality checking our data and running the model I'll talk about. And I also wanted to thank our technical working group that helped inform the creation of this program back in 2016, 2017. And lastly, I want to thank all the participants in PAMF who make everything possible. All right, here's those grainy videos. Okay, so if you're not familiar with it, this is Phragmites australis, or the common reed. It's invasive grass. It's found across much of North America, and it has invaded tens of thousands of hectares across the Great Lakes Basin. As you can see, it grows really tall. It forms these large monotypic stands that can crowd out native vegetation and alter a lot of different ecosystem functions. And this here is another field of Phragmites. You can see the extent to which it can take over an area. And managers spend a lot of time and money trying to remove Phragmites, especially before it gets to this point where it gets this bad. So currently there are a lot of different management techniques, like you can do mechanical removing, like cutting and things like that, herbicides, burning, or flooding. But depending on what technique you use, there's variable effectiveness depending on where you're managing it, what technique you're using, or what time of the year you're doing it. So in the past, there's been kind of a trial and error approach to management. And even when we work with experts, they tend to disagree about which of these techniques work best. And a lot of these techniques are really resource intensive. One problem that we have with managing Phragmites is not only do you have to deal with all of this above ground biomass, which there can be quite a lot of that, but there's also this really dense network of underground rhizomes or roots that store energy as well. So simply getting rid of all of those above ground stems might not necessarily get rid of the problem. So since Phragmites is a regional problem in the Great Lakes with a lot of different stakeholders, it's a really good example of a problem that we can tackle through collaborative action. So to do that, we founded the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative in 2010, and it's supposed to be a resource for people who are managing and researching invasive Phragmites. So if you're interested in learning more about the collaborative, our website is at greatlakesphragmites.net. And this is our mascot, Fraggy. He represents the native variety of Phragmites, which it also exists. So in 2017, the collaborative started an offshoot program that I'm going to talk about, which is PAMF. So PAMF, kind of like the title of my talk mentioned, it's a participatory science program. It's also an adaptive management program. So we work with managers from across the Great Lakes Basin. We collect Phragmites monitoring and management data from them at the sites that they're managing. And then we use that data in a predictive model to provide management guidance that's specific to their sites back to them. So each year, the predictive model is learning more about what techniques are working best and where. So the goal of the program, which I'll talk more about, is to basically optimize what management actions work best and the timing of those. So in this way, managers are able to basically contribute to and then also benefit from this collective learning process. So I'll walk you through how PAMF works. So as I mentioned briefly, this is an adaptive management program, which means that we're learning by doing. And in this case, we update what we know on an annual cycle. And there are 5 steps in this annual cycle. So the first step is enrolling. So a participant enrolls a management unit, which is just a patch of Phragmites that they want to manage. And I'll be referring to it as an MU for short. So they map out that unit, and then they tell us about any management restrictions they have. The 3 main ones that we care about are not being able to apply herbicides, not being able to cut underwater, and not being able to manipulate water levels or flood their management unit. And that will become apparent as to why that's important later. So then they monitor that unit, and that happens in July. they provide us with data about how well the Phragmites is doing or its establishment. And then on our end, we run a predictive model, and that provides participants with management guidance. So guidance is simply a set of management techniques that's predicted to be the most effective at reducing Phragmites on their unit over the coming year. So it's going to take into account any restrictions that they listed during that enrollment period. For instance, we're not going to recommend using herbicides if that's something that they can't do for legal reasons or because they're over water or something like that. So this management guidance is specific to their site. We don't send out the same blanket guidance to everybody. So it's individualized. So then they manage that MU, and they can choose to follow our guidance or not. We're perfectly happy to have the data either way. And then they send us reports and data about their management actions. So in the next year, the cycle starts over again at the monitoring step. And that's where they provide us with monitoring data that informs us about how well the management techniques that they used worked. So that was the yearly cycle, but I want to explain how it fits into the bigger picture and kind of the trajectory of PAMF overall, our ultimate goals with the program. So when we started PAMF, we created our predictive model based solely on data that was based on expert opinion. And that provided us with a really great starting point, but we want to know how well different management techniques work in the field. So that's where that annual cycle that I just showed you comes in. So every year we're learning more and more about what's working in the field or not. And then over time, we have a model that is more influenced by program data rather than the expert opinion. So as participant data is going up, hopefully we're decreasing uncertainty about which techniques are working best. And in the end, we want to be able to use that data collected from PAMF to provide a set of best management practices to anybody who's managing Phragmites in the Great Lakes. So I mentioned that PAMF is a participatory science program in that we're getting all of our data from the public. So literally anybody managing Phragmites can join the program, and we highly encourage it. Even if you're just cutting it down in your backyard, that's totally great. And there are a lot of benefits or opportunities into running a program this way. It can be more cost effective than going out and collecting the data ourselves. It's also an easy way to get a lot of data with a lot of variety. And it's also a really good way to educate folks about Phragmites. And because of that collective learning process I mentioned, it allows people's data to go further than just themselves, and they're contributing to something greater. Their data is not just sitting in a silo, it's being used for something more. However, I mean, yes, there are a lot of opportunities, but there can be some challenges associated with this as well, running a program this way. You do have to make sure that participants are trained properly and that the quality of the data that they're collecting is good. And because we're willing to take the data that anybody is willing to give us, that can lead to like unequal sample sizes. We might get a whole lot of information about one management technique and then hardly anything about another one. So it makes it hard for us to know whether that one that we're not getting data on, whether it's working well or not. So as I go through the program and how it works more in detail, I'll talk about how we try to design the program to be easy for participants to use. So first of all, we use an online data portal. This was built by the University of Georgia. So this is where participants can submit all of their data and look at summaries of their management unit's history. So we tried to make it a really simple design. It's got little report trackers you can see there. And that tracks which reports people still need to submit for the year. It checks them off as they submit them. Our goal was to make this data easily accessible to them in the portal, and also just really easy to use. So this is where you can enroll an MU, which you can either do by drawing it manually. So we have like a little Google Maps like interface you can use, or you can upload a spatial file. So after enrollment, the next step is monitoring, and that happens every year in July. So we're coming up on that pretty soon. And monitoring is meant to be fairly quick and easy. It doesn't require many tools. All you need is a quadrat, a pair of calipers, and a GPS capable device, like either a GPS or a smartphone. And the first two of those we provide for free. And the third one we can loan out if somebody needs it. And monitoring doesn't require any specialized background. Pretty much all you need to know is how to identify invasive Phragmites. So all you have to do is count and measure live stems from 5 quadrat locations across the MU, and then also estimate the % of the MU that's covered in live stems. So it's pretty quick. So the data from monitoring allows us to categorize the MU into one of 6, what we call invasion states that we use in the PAMF model. So this basically ranges from low to high amounts of Phragmites, or in this picture, you can see 1 to 6. So we make these states up based on the stem density data that's collected from the quadrats and from the % establishment, or again, the area of the MU that's covered in Phragmites. And when people want to manage Phragmites, we break down the timing of their management activities into what we call 3 biological phases of Phragmites. So there's the translocating phase in the fall. This is a great time to manage the plant, since this is when it is moving or translocating sugars or energy from those big above ground stems to the below ground rhizomes. And then there's the dormant phase in the winter. So that's, you can see it, it's become brown, it's dead, it's senesced, and nothing is really going on. And then there is the growing phase in the summer, which, as its name implies, it is growing, sending up new shoots, and getting big and bushy again. So for each phase, there should be one management action in PAMF. So for example, this is one of the combinations of management actions we use in PAMF. So in this example, it might include using like a glyphosate-based herbicide in the translocating phase, then clearing the unit of stems in the dormant phase when they're dead, and then flooding the unit in the growing season. But we have more than just those management actions. There are 10 different management actions that we consider in PAMF. So I'll just go through all of these briefly. The first 3 are all herbicide-based solutions. So we either include glyphosate-based herbicides, imazapyr-based herbicides, or what we call glyphosate plus, which is just a combination of glyphosate and imazapyr. And I should note briefly that that will be any form of application. So that could be hand wicking, it could be spraying, it could be any number of ways to apply it. And then there are a bunch of different ways to target the stems, like cutting and leaving the biomass, cutting and removing it, like bagging it up and taking it off site, cutting it underwater. And you could also spade the stems, which is just cutting the stem underground at like a 45-degree angle and kind of smothering the plant and cutting it off from the rhizome. You can also flood or rest, which is when we say rest, it means doing nothing for a given biological phase. And you might wonder like why that would be an action, but you could think like in combination with other actions, it kind of makes sense. Like for instance, maybe you would rest during the dormant season, but do something intensive in the rest of the year. So we put these 10 actions into 16 combinations to learn about and figure out which ones of these combinations of these actions are working best. And so I'm not going to go through all 16 of these combinations. The goal is not to really overwhelm you with this table, but just to show there are 16 different ones, but these are the ones that our technical working group who helped put together the program chose these in particular because they are either popular combinations that are already in use, or because they're ones that they think are probably really effective, but we just don't have enough data to support that information. So we really want to learn more about the effectiveness of all of these different combinations. And some of them could be really great, but maybe they're just not being used very much. So here's an example management unit. Let's just make up a hypothetical one. And so this is basically what participants are turning in every year. So they're submitting their monitoring and management data, and we end up with this group of information here. We get a monitoring report from July of year 1. And then we get information about all the management they performed during those 3 phases that I mentioned. And then they get a monitoring report from July of year 2. So this way we're getting a great before and after look at how well those management actions worked at reducing Phragmites. So for example, we might start out with a unit in state 6, which if you remember, that's the highest state you can possibly be in. It's just completely infested with Phragmites. And then say we use some highly effective management combination and we reduce it to state 1. Now let's pretend we have another management unit. Say in this example, we use a not so great management action and we reduce the invasion state only by 1 step. So say from state 5 to state 4. Both of these example management units give us really great information because it gives us the probabilities that it's going to transition between different states given different management actions. And this is what we use to inform our model. So I'm going to give you a really brief overview of how the model works. And don't worry, I'm not going to get into the math of how it works. Although if you're into that sort of thing, it's a state and transition model with a Markov decision process. And if you want to talk about that more offline, I'm happy to do so. But this is the basic process of how the model produces guidance. So we start out with prior knowledge of what those transitions that I just showed you in the previous slides between those invasion states are going to be. So since we've been running the program for 5 years now, this is a combination of the expert opinion from the beginning, and then also the data that we've collected so far. So then we get more monitoring and management data from our participants, and we use that to update the prior information. So this is where the model is learning, quote unquote. So we then optimize that with measures of cost and satisfaction. So cost, we use this because we want to prioritize cheaper management actions because we want people to save money. And we use satisfaction because we want people to be happy with the amount of Phragmites they have. So it's pretty intuitive. Basically, you're happier if you have less Phragmites and you're unhappy if you have more. And this is an important concept I'll talk about a little bit later. So the model then, from all this learning, it spits out the management guidance that people can use for the following year. And that has the management combinations that were predicted to be the most effective and efficient for a given unit. That then informs the next round of data that we get in the next cycle. So if people follow that guidance, this process repeats year after year. Okay, so what does the guidance that we give out look like? Basically, it's a single management action during each one of those biological phases, translocating, dormant, and growing. And it takes into account any management restrictions that people mentioned during enrollment. So again, if you can't use herbicides, we won't recommend that you use them. We give out both optimal and near optimal guidance, and those are expected to perform about the same, but optimal would clearly be the better one. But we do this so that it gives people more options to choose from. So the guidance is pretty general, and we made it that way on purpose. It's supposed to be accessible for people of different backgrounds. We made it because, you know, if somebody's managing Phragmites in their backyard, they're likely not going to have the capability to spray herbicide from a helicopter, but that's something that might totally be within the range of possibilities for like a state agency. So overall, this guidance is meant to be really flexible with its application and the timing, as long as it fits within those approximate biological phases. So giving out guidance is one of the main ways that we incentivize participation in the program. Another way that we try to motivate people to participate is by providing these yearly progress reports for each management unit. So this is a PDF we send out. It has graphs that show the progress of the MU over time, as well as summaries of all the management actions that they've taken, any costs associated with management, all the guidance that they've ever received. And this can be handy for managers keeping track of their units, but it can also be good for funders or other people who are interested in how the unit is progressing across its management journey. So we also send out these yearly participation summaries to acknowledge managers' work in the program. It's just a little letter that explains how many management units they have and all the good work they've done so far. So really, there are a lot of benefits to joining PAMF. I mean, as I've mentioned before, you get to be a part of this collective learning process and contribute to something bigger than yourself. I mean, we have a lot of participants that, you know, maybe they're following a specific state set of management actions. You know, they're not really going to follow our guidance necessarily, but they want to be able to contribute to the learning process. So they still participate in the program. It also is, you get the clear benefit of management guidance. There's access to a standardized monitoring protocol to keep track of how your unit's doing every year. It's a place where you can store data and records and photos. And there is an opportunity to collaborate, maybe on management projects with other managers, possibility to collaborate with researchers on various projects. And lastly, there are those annual summaries that I just mentioned. So now that we've had some background on how PAMF works, I wanted to give you a status update of the program. We've had 5 years of going through this adaptive management cycle and learning, and we've had almost 300 MUs registered across the Great Lakes. There's been over 70 managers enrolled, and a portion of which are active in any given year. And as you can see on the map here, we've had MUs that are spread across all 8 Great Lakes states and Ontario. And we have units that are managed by a lot of different groups, as you can see in this graph on the right. Most of our MUs are managed by conservation NGOs, but we've also got, you know, all levels of government, from state, federal, local, to lots of other different types of organizations. And we've given out around 100 sets of management guidance each year since 2018. So that's a total of 512 sets distributed. You can see it hasn't changed a whole lot over the years. And when I say a set of management guidance, I mean the set of actions per management unit. So that's those optimal and near optimal recommendations. So we've been giving out all this guidance, but you know, we want to know, is it actually working? And there's 2 different ways that we can measure success in PAMF. And the first one is a little less straightforward than the other. So one way is to look at how many participants actually followed the guidance that we give them. So sometimes people can't use our guidance because, as I mentioned earlier, you know, some people have pre-established plans, or maybe, you know, equipment broke. There's just some reason why they can't follow the guidance. But generally, we perceive it as if they are following the guidance, it's a good sign that they view that guidance as useful. So far, we found that 75% of MUs have followed our guidance. These ones are the ones that are eligible to make that determination. It basically means they turned in all the monitoring and management reports we would need to know that. So the other more concrete way we can measure success in PAMF is by looking for a decrease in the invasion state at the MU since the time it was enrolled. Because obviously we want Phragmites to go down over time, right? So of the MUs where we're able to actually measure that change over time, so where they've submitted those 2 monitoring reports at least a year apart, we ended up having declines in invasion state at the majority of the MU, so at 65%. And then at 24%, the invasion state stayed the same, and at 11%, it increased, so it grew. So I just want to note that at many of those MUs with the increase, they chose not to manage that year, which likely accounts for the increase. And this gets a little bit weird, but not managing is actually one of the types of guidance that we send out. It's just that rest action or do nothing spread across all the biological phases. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, and briefly, I wanted to mention that overall, it looks like management at these MUs is reducing Phragmites invasion state, or at least keeping it the same in most cases. And this is great because it is really a difficult plant to manage. So I do want to touch on some improvements that we're making to our guidance. In recent years, we've had a situation where the model is suggesting more and more what we call rest, 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 or doing nothing for the whole year. So resting for each one of those biological phases. And usually people who are engaged in PAMF are just, they're not interested in resting. They want to actively manage Phragmites, understandable. But it's the cheapest option. And the model in its prioritization tends to rank it highly because of the fact that it's free. But there's also another reason why it does that, and it's because of that satisfaction I mentioned earlier, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the fact that we even include rest in guidance, it might seem a bit confusing, but we use it as a PAMF combination for a couple of reasons. It's something that people often have to report due to just basic circumstance, like say their equipment breaks down, so they're not able to manage. If they lose staff capacity, there's basically like any number of reasons why people can't manage in a given year. So we want to give them the option to turn in data about that. Secondly, we also include it because we really want to learn about how fast a patch of Phragmites rebounds after a year of not managing. That's also data that we need for the model. So, but regardless, this recommendation of rest, rest, rest is becoming a problem. So we responded by updating the model. So I'm not going to get too much into the specifics of the model, but we have updated the satisfaction values that go into the optimization process. And before, the model, it used to have just a single satisfaction value associated with each invasion state. So as an example, this is a MU in state 4, and it got a satisfaction value of 31.6 out of 100. So this makes sense. We're not very happy about it. It's kind of a higher level of invasion, so it gets a low score. So now what we've done is the model uses satisfaction that is associated not with a single state, but the transition in or out of that state to assign a satisfaction. So this is a little bit weird, but so for example, if we grow some Phragmites and we go from a low state like this state 1 to state 4, we're going to be less satisfied than if we killed a whole bunch of frag and we took the invasion state down from state 6 and went to state 4. So you can imagine that if you're resting or doing nothing, we're in this first category. We want to give that lower priority now in the model. And so far, we've seen really good results. Testing this in the model, we're getting less rest. And so we're expecting some improved guidance in the future. So I wanted to go through some of the lessons learned from PAMF. So, I mean, even if you're not managing Phragmites, if you're interested in running some sort of a participatory science program, this is kind of geared toward you. So in terms of program design, even though PAMF has a lot of moving parts on the back end, we tried to keep things as simple as possible on the participants' end. So we do that by making the monitoring process really simple and accessible, by making that data entry process easy in just a single location. We also have participant trainings. So we do this a couple different ways. We do this in person, we do this virtually, and we also have an online learning platform through the Moodle course system. So that's something that anybody can get online at any time and work on it at their own pace. So by having a whole bunch of different ways that people can learn, we hope that they're going to be able to fit training into their busy schedules. We also have an open line of communication, and the PAMF coordinator who's at the Great Lakes Commission, she's always available by phone or email for questions. And lastly, we try to encourage participation by adding in lots of bonuses for participants, like the summary reports, and even we try to like gamify things by adding little badges on the web hub for completing different actions, or if you've like been in the program long enough, and try to do fun things like that. So we've also learned a lot about data quality control. So by keeping the protocol simple, that cuts down in itself on a lot of data errors. We also have built-in data checks in our web hub to make sure that people are entering in numbers that, you know, are in the appropriate range. Like, so for example, you know, if you type in like a stem diameter of 500 millimeters, I mean, this is a giant stem diameter, that's not possible. It'll recognize that and it'll say, you know, you're entering a giant stem diameter. Are you sure this value is correct? Because most people see a range between like X and Y. And it will still allow you to enter a date, like a big number if something truly is out of range, but it just, you know, does a little check and make sure that you're aware of that. So we also provide feedback every year. So when we're going through all the reports and doing quality checks, we keep track of anything that we're seeing similar mistakes over and over. So if people are submitting error-prone reports, we send them reminders about how to prevent that in the future. We also try to send out like monitoring tips and things before the monitoring season, so it's refreshed in everybody's mind. So we try to make people's data accessible to them through the web hub. And lastly, we have to be comfortable with rejecting data. So sometimes there's just no way around it. If something seems suspect, it's probably best to leave it out. Like for example, if we find out later that this has happened in the past where a participant is kind of dubious that a contractor that they hired treated the entirety of a patch, that's something that we can go back and exclude from data in the model. So, you know, if there's anything that you think is, you know, out of whack, you can just let us know. So, or if we find out that something happened, like somebody is out and they're counting like baby Phragmites, they might have been mistaking it for reed canary grass, which is very easy to do and they're both small. That's something we might also want to exclude. So overall, I'd say that we've learned to be really responsive to participant feedback. I think this is a really important part of running a program like this. And so we send out a yearly feedback survey and we take those results really seriously. People's feedback about the REST guidance is a big reason of why we updated the model. And it's also important to recognize and celebrate your participants' efforts, because without them, PAMF just simply wouldn't function. And also running a program like this, you do have to keep your expectations reasonable. And I mean that not only in terms of project design, but in terms of participation. So in the planning phase of PAMF, we really had to focus in on the particular management actions we were interested in, rather than like every management combination under the sun. I mean, I know 16 seems like a lot, but it could have been a lot more. You know, it would have taken us forever to learn about how well each one of those was working. So, you know, you have to keep it reasonable, a certain number that you want to learn about. And similarly for the participants, we can't expect them to go out and perform like a full-scale research project. You know, we have to be respectful of people's time and effort. We also try to provide a wide variety of resources to help with PAMF. I mean, PAMF can be complex. There's a lot of moving parts. So we have a lot of how-to videos on YouTube and in our web hub. We have flow charts, lots of different guides to help people with the program. We also have like a refresher online course that's just a quick thing to do before you go out in the field again for the year. And lastly, we always try to maintain continual communication with our participants through email and by working with them in the field. So I wanted to briefly highlight an exciting upcoming addition to PAMF that is starting in 2024. The Great Lakes Commission is going to be offering grants to managers who are using some of those underrepresented PAMF combinations. So yeah, there will be grants to help manage Phragmites and participate in PAMF, again, in the Great Lakes. So there are a lot of PAMF combinations that we really want to learn more about, but very few people are submitting data for them. So we haven't nailed down all the specifics of this project yet, but if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, or if you're interested in joining the planning group, then please get in touch with us. Our contact info is coming up. So yeah, this is getting to the end here. So even if you aren't managing Phragmites, hopefully, as I mentioned, you've learned a little bit more about managing kind of a participatory science program, a lot of moving parts. This type of program could be modified to work on tackling a lot of different management problems. And I want to encourage you that if you are managing Phragmites, we're enrolling participants all the time. Our monitoring season is coming up in July. So if you are managing in the Great Lakes, or if you know somebody who might be interested, you can check out our website, which is here at greatlakesphragmites.net/PAMF, or you can send us an email to get started. It's just pamf@glc.org. And as I mentioned before, we have that online training course that can be taken at any time. So it's not like you have to wait to do some sort of training with us. It's basically log on the internet and get going. Yeah, so we're really interested in enrolling more sites and collecting more data to help our model learn, and in turn help everybody learn more about how to manage Phragmites. So I know that was kind of a lot, but yeah, thank you for watching my talk, and feel free to contact us with any questions. So yeah, thanks to the Stewardship Network.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Lots of great information in there. And the program is so interesting. I love how you got into the various aspects of both design and implementation, and we've had a lot of great questions in the chat, so I want to dive right into it if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So I guess a couple questions that I want to highlight at first, because people are wondering about the qualifications for participating. And so I see one person in the chat saying, what if your population is not big enough for 5 quadrants?
Okay, yeah, so the quadrants are very small. They're only like 0.25 by 0.25 meters. And we would recommend that usually, like, we don't actually have a size restriction on the management units. We usually say that they should be about 10 meters square, just so that there is enough space to fit the quadrants, and that there's enough, like, you can measure it accurately with a GPS, because GPSs usually have a error distance of about that too. So unfortunately, that might be a little too small, but that would have to be a pretty small patch of frag if it didn't fit those 5 small quadrats. So, but yeah, 10 meters is about what we would recommend for the smallest size.
That's great. And then I see someone in the Q&A, in order to participate, must it be a current working site, or can it be information from an area that has been brought under control and is now being monitored annually without the need for treatment?
Yes, yes. So you, there's a spot in the enrollment form where it's perfectly fine to have a site that's already been treated. And so you'll just mention, like, you know, it's been treated X years with this, or, you know, you'll just write that into the enrollment information section. And then you can just, if you're not actively managing, you can just report those rest actions every year and then just monitor, and that's it.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Another question, can you talk more about who can monitor? I work with local schools and I'd love to promote this as an option for our K-12 teachers so that their students can participate in real citizen science.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. There's no, yeah, that's what's great about PAMF is there's no, you don't have to be a plant biologist to go out and do this. The training is relatively simple. As I mentioned, you just kind of need to know how to identify Phragmites. Extra benefit is to know how to identify it versus native Phragmites, because we don't want to manage that. But yeah, it would be a perfect project for high school students to do, for sure.
That's great. I see another question that just came in the chat. So once enrolled, what if the area you want to manage seems to be already enrolled as managed? Is there a way to tell if areas are already managed and to collaborate with people that already manage that area?
Oh, interesting question. We actually accidentally ran across this for the first time last year, where we enrolled a site that was within another site. And it doesn't show up immediately in our system, but yeah, we can pretty quickly tell whether that's a thing or not. And we will obviously have the contact information for who manages that. So we could figure that out.
That's great. Thank you. And then there are kind of two questions that I may roll into one here. So one is, can I enroll an MU if it's not in the Great Lakes region? And the extension of that is, would PAMF ever consider expanding beyond the Great Lakes?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. And unfortunately, we are currently restricting our enrollment to the Great Lakes. So we try to be within the basin itself, but really any Great Lakes state or province, can technically enroll. So yeah, at this time, it's just that our model is not really accounting for like that geographic variation that, like a site in the mountains or down south is probably not going to be under the same environmental conditions that we're having here. So yeah, unfortunately, that's the limitation there. It would be really cool in the future to expand PAMF out. But as I mentioned at the top, like our funder is the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So, we're primarily focused in the Great Lakes. But there are other, adaptive management programs working on other invasive species. So, I mean, this is something that could be totally expanded.
Right. Yeah, that's what my follow-up question was going to be. Is there anybody else doing similar work in other regions that you're aware of? Do you know of any other organizations in like the South, for example, or something that are doing similar work to what you're doing?
So I'm not sure about in the South, but so we've recently been collaborating more with, there's a couple other programs within the Department of Interior, which is the parent of USGS. They have a few different adaptive management programs. One is it's called NPAM. We all have fun abbreviations. So NPAM is the Native Prairie Adaptive Management Program. So they work on prairie issues out west. And similarly out west, there's the annual brome adaptive management group. And so these ones aren't, as far as I know, open to the public. I think they work more with parks, like national parks and things like that. So yeah, they're a little bit more limited. As far as I know, PAMF is one of the few or only public ones.
Great, thank you. So I'm seeing someone asking, can you join if you have a population that has been an ongoing project for several years? And do you need to add the treatment history somehow?
Yeah, again, so yeah, that would be totally fine. You don't have to, I mean, if you were able to send us reports from the past, that would be helpful, but you won't have the monitoring information because the monitoring information has to be a specific format. But again, that's something that if you enrolled the site and wrote that management history in the enrollment form, just in the comments, there's also like some drop down that you list, like how many years was it treated with X or whatever. Yeah, that's all information you can fill out. We will take any management unit.
Right. Yeah. No, that's what it sounds like. And that's excellent. And getting a lot of good questions about qualifications for the program. So it sounds like people are interested in being a part of it. So what if you are an existing volunteer group working for a park district? Would the park district need to be doing more paperwork, or can the volunteers do this on their own and enroll their site?
more of a question that they would probably want to ask the park, because on our end, we don't have any restriction. It's basically anybody could sign up. We have, lots of volunteer groups that work on different properties that manage sites. So yeah, I think it's basically what the park would want to do. It's up to them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just coordinating with the park to make sure. Yeah, that's great. And I think I saw one specific mention of this, but I think it was only for a particular type of management or aspect of the program. But does enrollment have any benefit of obtaining funds to aid in managing the control project?
Well, as of now, we don't have any funding available. So I know that I think there's at least one grant program out there that requires PAMF as a prerequisite to getting the grant. But in itself, we are not able to provide any sort of grant funding at this time. But I mean, it could be a benefit. Like if you're applying to some grant and you say, oh, we're also participating in this program, that it might, seem, they might approve of that because it's like you're getting a standardized monitoring protocol. It might help them with data collection and monitoring your progress for the grant. So it's possible, but I don't know.
That's great. We also just had a logistical question of, will this PowerPoint be available? Of course, the recording will be available online, but is this something that you make publicly available for the PowerPoint?
We haven't had plans to do that yet, but I can look into it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then, and we will getting a little bit close to the top of the hour, but a couple other questions, and thank you so much. These have been great, and I'm glad everybody's being direct about their qualifications for the program, because that I'm hoping that we get a bunch of new signups for you through this.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had was, and maybe you mentioned this at some point, but are you familiar with the distribution of native frag versus invasive? Like, do you know how prevalent one is compared to the other, or does it just vary widely?
Yeah, it's pretty variable. We're actually going to be putting out a mapping project through the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. So at that main website, greatlakesphragmites.net, that's coming out soon. It'll be a mapper that shows some of the genetic results we've had from testing different samples. So that'll show where native plants have been found. But yeah, I mean, in general, I'm going to say that the non-native is much more prevalent. And then the native is kind of just interspersed wherever.
That's great. Thank you. And then another, maybe this is hypothetical, or maybe you mentioned this. So I'm imagining somebody going through this program, getting a set of recommendations, sent to them, and then either they're trying to do this work themselves, or perhaps they're contracting the work out, and maybe they have a consultant come, to check out the property or whatever. And I'm wondering if you ever have the experience where the model maybe recommends something different than what the on-the-ground consultant would recommend, or if there's an aspect of this program that involves coordinating with experts on the ground that maybe are an invasives treatment group that might be able to verify or validate the recommendations that are being made, because obviously it's a model, and that helps it scale because you're doing this thing and it's kind of automatic. But I'm just wondering about the coordination between on the ground practitioners and whether there's ever any are you sure, are you going to listen to this model versus this person on the ground that is in here right now? So just wondering about that.
Maybe our coordinator would know more, but I personally don't know of any instance where, that's been an issue. I feel like a lot of this stuff, the decisions that the people make about how they're going to manage are made, kind of on their end. And we don't really get to hear, kind of that story that goes along with it. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we do get feedback sometimes that say, somebody followed a totally different management combination. And then they list the reasons why, and they say I didn't agree with this guidance. And a lot of times we don't necessarily get information specifically about why that is, or, but yeah, I can't think of a time when then that's actually happened. But yeah, those are conversations, I mean, people need to be having with contractors and need to figure that stuff out.
Right. And it sounds like this in some ways is not a perfect alternative, but an additional tool that might be more accessible to people if they're not able to get a contractor out there to check it out on their property. Obviously, in some ways that's ideal. You've got somebody that's on the ground that knows the area, that treats similar areas around them. But this program being something that's maybe more accessible more widely just because it's automated and things like that. And then I will have to say sorry to the rest of the people that have questions as we'll transition to our outro slides now, but a lot of great questions. Thank you all so much. And want to continue this conversation, and certainly reach out to Taaja if you have additional questions or specifics that you'd like to talk about. And thank you so much, Taaja, for the presentation. It was amazing. So let me just hop in here and share my slides real quick. Okay. So a reminder that the Stewardship Network Spring Challenge is going on now, happening from April 12th to June 30th. And for the record, if you're doing something like monitoring for PAMF, that totally counts. And we have a monitoring category. So please do report any monitoring that you're doing. And we encourage you to report and donate by June 30th. That is the deadline. And you can report any work that has been done since April 12th of this year. So thank you all so much for supporting the program. We really appreciate you. So our next TSN monthly webcast is on July 12th of next month. And we will be joined by Travis Anklem. And the topic will be growing the global stewardship movement, lessons from connecting Australian and US practitioners. So we're really excited to have Travis with us next month. And with that, I would just like to say thank you so much to everybody online. Thank you so much to Taaja for your great presentation. And we will see you again next month.